Welcome one and all to yet another red hot, juicy, sizzling Kings of War battle report. It's 2,600 points and it's Undead versus Undead. A dead civil war, if you will. And for this game, we'll be using the control scenario. That, of course, being the scenario where the board is divided up into 6 squares and the aim is to control as many of them at the end of the game as possible with your unit strength. And if you control the one in the centre on your opponent's side, then you get 2 victory points for that one, and all the others are just worth 1. So, as we go through the lists, you'll notice that there are a few similarities in the two lists. There are a couple of things that are identical, funnily enough, and then there's quite a bit that's different as well. So, let's start with my army, shall we? So, on the right flank here, we have got a horde of werewolves, and they have the Brew of Strength. You'll notice there's quite a lot of upgrades because there's a couple of pretty elite armies here. Then next to them, we've got Soul Reaver Infantry. There are 2 regiments of them featured in the shot here. And between them is Lady Ilona. So that means that the Lady Ilona formation is in there, which gives them extra speed and makes them unwaverable. And the 2 Soul Reaver Infantry units both have upgrades. One of them has Blessing of the Gods and the other one has Chant of Hate, so making them even more killy. And if you want to know which one's which, the one at the top of the screen, I believe, is the one that is elite, represented by the fact that it has pink flowers at the front of the unit, and the other unit does not. So that's how we're telling them apart. And right at the bottom left there, we have a Revenant King on an Undead Worm, and he has the Dwarven Ale. So going very heavy on this flank, and when we get to my opponent's army, you'll see why it's been set up this way. And I think that was the only shot of my army there. Or maybe I took pictures of the opponent's army first, actually. That's what it looks like. That was just showing this end of the table. So we'll get to the rest of my list in a moment. So, here is my opponent's army. There are 2 regiments of Soul Reaver Infantry. One of them is all the way out on the flank here. Ilona is right in the middle of your picture there. And there's a catapult and an Undead Standard Bearer. And the Soul Reaver Infantry units have exactly the same upgrades as mine. And the one that you can see on the left of the picture there is the one that has Vicious. There's a Skeleton Regiment on the right there. And as we move along, you can see the other Soul Reavers. They are the elite unit. There is a Skeleton Horde. There are 2 Skeleton Hordes, in fact. And there is a Necromancer on an Undead Horse behind them. And then over on this flank, there are 2 hordes of Barrow Wights, there are 2 troops of mummies, and there is also a cursed pharaoh. So we are going to look at my army properly now. And you can see it's quite a decent flank for the enemy there, but you'll notice that it's a pretty slow undead army I'm looking at here. The fast units, which would be Ilona mainly, and the Soul Reaver Infantry, which have been boosted by the formation, they're all on the left. So I've put quite a healthy burst of speed over on my right flank, so that's giving me an advantage there. I've got Werewolves, Revenant King on Worm, both units of Soul Reaver Infantry, Ilona, and in the centre we've got a regiment of Wraiths. We've got a Revenant King on a horse, so he can help out with a bit of surging or fighting, nice versatile character there. 2 zombie legions. One of them has the Hammer of Measured Force. That will be this one here, with the Necromancer standing at the front of the unit there, and the banner. That's the one with the Hammer of Measured Force. Then there is a regiment of Soul Reaver Cavalry with the Potion of the Caterpillar, which is why they're positioned next to those woods, so they can charge through that without any hindrance. And all the way over on this flank, ignore the table next door, we have Lycanis, and Lycanis does not have any upgrades. So, I've made sure that I've got a speed advantage on both sides here, because if you look at, let's just go into turn 1 here, because you can see that my opponent has won the roll-off and is going first. The Soul Reaver Infantry have that little bit of extra speed, but they're not as fast as Lycanis or Soul Reaver Cavalry, so I've put them on the same side as those units, so I'm not going to be outsped over there, and I've also got fast units over on the right that are considerably faster than my opposing units over there. So you can see everything's moving up. I'm quite satisfied that the Soul Reaver infantry, both units, are over on this flank because I'm planning to not fight them at all for a while. I would just like to keep them out of the game and get mine into the game. So I've got very few units over here to counter them. And if the unit all the way on the left there, if they want to stay out of Lycanis's charge range, he's not much of a threat to them, but if they want to just chase after him and dance around with him for a while, that's fine by me because they're investing a lot more points there. The catapult can be surged up onto that hill in a minute, so that's why it's behind a hill. It'll still be able to shoot after doing that. And you can see here skeletons, lots of skeletons have gone forward, and the Soul Reaver infantry have moved up, but I don't think they're touching the woods yet, so they can't see through, but also I can't charge them through the woods. I believe that is the case. 2 skeleton hordes there. Then over here, the Barrow Wights and the mummies have moved up. And you'll notice that this unit on the right here, possibly a tiny mistake made here because, not in terms of the rules, but in terms of positioning. So the mummies at the front are more narrow than the Barrow Wights, and they're not positioned all the way to one side, so I may be able to get a multi-charge onto the unit behind them, one at each side. So that's always something to consider there. If you're going to leave a gap to charge past a unit, so there's space for something to impact the unit behind, make sure you put the space on one side if you're trying to avoid a multi-charge. So the catapult is surged onto the hill, and it actually hits and does 3 damage to the Soul Reaver cavalry, which isn't very nice. So they'll be hoping to avoid any further damage from that, and then when they get into combat they would hope to immediately life leech a couple of those wounds back. But if they get up above that kind of level, they are in a bit of peril. And the Pharaoh casts something on the Soul Reavers, the Soul Reaver infantry here, next to Ilona, and 4 damage. So a bit of beefy casting there. I'm not sure what the spell was. It could have been Fireball, something like that. And that's how the flanks are looking there, on the right flank. So what I'm going to do next, and there's the left flank. What my plan is for turn 1, I'm moving up, just getting into range so I can charge and the enemy can't. And if they continue moving forward in the same way with the mummies kind of in the middle of that unit and not shuffled over to one side, I am going to have the opportunity for a multi-charge on that unit behind them at some point. So I've got all my units to within my charge range, outside of the enemy charge range, and there aren't really many surge options on this side of the table. Most of them are in the middle or on my opponent's left in the other side. The left as I look at it. So I've positioned the Revenant King on Worm, looking down a bit, so he's going to have a few charge options. And Lady Ilona is behind the house, I think. You can't really see her in this shot. She's down there next to the unit of Soul Reavers, staying out of enemy charge range, as I said. In the middle, Zombie Legion. I think I surged one of the units forward. And the Wraiths are also looking over to that flank as well, so if the enemy want to push forward, they're going to be worrying about lots of units charging them. Because there's not anything on that side that I feel could stand up to Wraiths, 2 units of Soul Reaver infantry with upgrades, Lady Ilona and the Werewolf Horde. So if he gives me charges on multiple units, then I'm definitely going to be able to wipe several of them in one go. And these other Zombie Legion have moved up into the woods, so if those Soul Reavers want to charge them with a hindered charge and just get stuck there fighting a legion of zombies, where I've got the option to countercharge them with the caterpillar-wielding Soul Reaver cavalry, or even surging other zombies into their flank perhaps, then they can feel free. And Lycanis is just chilling around there, staying out of charge range of everything, just threatening flanks, because the Soul Reaver infantry, while they wouldn't be scared of a front charge from Lycanis, you wouldn't want to take him in the flank really with 10 attacks. That could actually be enough to worry them. Turn 2 for my opponent. So it's not the most adventurous bit of flank action over here, and I'm quite happy to keep all these units out of the game a little bit. You can see the Soul Reavers have actually moved backwards there by the looks of it. and I'm quite satisfied with that, just keeping them out of the game a bit longer, even though it means they'll be alive and able to contest table sections at the end of the game. I'm going to have a lot, because I'm very, very confident in the right flank. I think I'm going to wipe that out in a turn or two, and then everything's going to be steaming in from that side, so I'll have a massive advantage, I think. As long as the Soul Reaver infantry on this side, from my enemy, if they don't get into combat, then they're not going to be able to cope with everything that's thrust their way. And you can see the skeletons getting into position. There's the possibility of one of them being surged into the zombies here. And over on the flank, you can see that the mummies are still leaving, the mummies on the right, as I look at it, are leaving a tiny bit of a gap on the left-hand side of those Barrow Wights. So I am going to be able to get a double charge there, depending on which units I use, because, of course, you still need to actually make contact with that point to fit in there. And the catapult, what does it do this time? Well, it puts 5 damage onto Lycanis. Wow, so that's 2 hits now. So that's not good. And the Pharaoh puts 4 damage onto the werewolves, which is okay because they're about to get into combat, but it could lead to them being killed later in the game. A bit of damage on them. Lycanis gets wavered, which is okay because he's pretty safe there, unless he takes another direct hit. And this horde of skeletons are surged into the zombie legion, which is okay, because they're only able to do 5 damage. As you'd expect, they don't take out a legion of zombies. And that's how it's looking. So I'm quite satisfied with how it is at the moment. I'm not going to leave my Soul Reaver cavalry over there for very long. I'm going to move them more into the centre, away from potential units they don't want to fight. They don't want to charge into just a regiment of skeletons and then get flanked by Soul Reaver infantry. That would be a terrible move. So I'm going to hold them back a bit and hope that my opponent does the same with his infantry, because they are his most hard-hitting units. And I think Lady Ilona, you can see at the top there, Lady Ilona is working her way over to the right, perhaps suspecting that the right flank is in peril. So that's how it looks, and yep, you can definitely see the gap there, so I'm going to be able to charge 2 units into the Barrow Wights on the right. So what happens? Well, the werewolves and Lady Ilona charge into the Barrow Wights. I'll just go back so you can see exactly where they slot in. You can see where that tree is that's off its base at the moment. That's where the werewolves go. Ilona goes into that tiny little gap that is left there on the left of the unit. The Soul Reavers, directly opposite those mummies on the right, will go straight into them, the Soul Reaver infantry. And the Revenant King on Worm is going to charge the Pharaoh to stop its spell casting. And then the Soul Reaver infantry on the left are going to charge straight into the mummies. So the only unit I'm leaving untouched are the Barrow Wights on the left. And I'm quite happy with that because they can't take out multiple units in one go. If you're going to go in for a big strike like this with multi-charges, you're generally going to have to leave something, because you don't just want to charge one unit into everything and risk nothing dying so all of them can countercharge. You have to guarantee that something's going to die, and those wights aren't the easiest to take out with just a single unit. So the double charge paid off there. The mummies died as well. The Pharaoh only took 2 damage from the Revenant King though, but it's not going to be able to spellcast. And the other Soul Reaver infantry did take out the mummies there as well. So only 2 units left over here for the enemy, taking out a lot of their potential scoring unit strength units in this scenario as well. So very satisfied with how that went. Over on this side, double zombie charge onto the skeletons. And I'm quite happy for this to just rumble on for a while, because the zombie legions are going to win this fight if it continues. And I think the way those units are positioned now, I don't think the skeleton unit behind are going to be able to do too much. They're not going to be able to double charge one of my units, basically. That's the thing I would like to avoid, and I don't think they will be able to. Over on this side, Lycanis just turns around and backs up a bit, just to stay out of charge range of everything. And you can see that Soul Reaver infantry unit for my opponent, all the way in the top left. They are completely out of the game at the moment, so I'm very happy that they're not fighting. They're only a regiment, so keeping them alive, they're worth the same in scenario terms as the skeleton regiment there. So I'm glad they're not engaging at the moment. And you can see my Soul Reaver cavalry, like I said, they've just moved into the centre, away from the hard-hitting enemy units, ready to lay in the pain in the centre. And there's how that flank looks. Very, very healthy indeed. Moving on to turn 3. So enemy turn 3. First of all, this unit of skeletons countercharges the zombies on the left rather than the right. Had they countercharged the right-hand zombie legion, then the other unit of skeletons may have been able to charge into the zombies on the left, possibly with surge involvement, but they would have been hindered. And so my opponent decided that he would rather countercharge the unit on the left and avoid hindrance because it's a countercharge. But it does mean that he's going to get flanked by the other zombies now. The Wights go into the wounded Soul Reaver infantry. These ones were always likely to get killed, so I'm expecting that, and then all my other units will be able to kill those Wights next turn. Over here, you can see the Necromancer on horse is chilling behind the woods. And the Pharaoh does a bit of damage onto the Revenant King on Worm, but not much, not enough to worry him. And the Soul Reaver infantry are dead, as expected, but it's a very worthy trade, everything I've taken off already. And they can't turn to face anything either, because there are wraiths looking directly at them from the bottom left of the screen, just off camera. So if they turn to face the other units on the right, then they will take a flank from the wraiths, which wouldn't be very healthy. So that unit is basically doomed, whichever way they turn at the moment. So as you can see, the only thing they can do is go backwards and hope that they end up in the woods and cause a bit of hindrance to some of the units charging them, which is what they do. Zombies take a little bit of damage, but not enough to concern them at all. And turn 3 for me. So you can see there that the werewolves are just off the top of the screen there and moving upwards and going behind the enemy lines to try and stake a claim to the centre of the opponent's territory to get the victory points for that, to get the decent amount of unit strength in there. Ilona and the Revenant King have gone into the Pharaoh, and they've wavered the Pharaoh. The Wraiths and the Soul Reaver infantry there take out those Wights with relative ease with the double charge, and now they're turning to face the potential action. But because so much is dead, I can afford to leave some of these units behind and just claim table sections. It's going very well at the moment. I mean, look at that. Some of these units may not even get to fight for the rest of the game, but they will be very useful for holding table sections at the end. The double zombie charge, one in the front, one in the flank, and that is a skeleton horde dead. Not looking very healthy for the opponent's army here, especially since that Soul Reaver infantry is still nowhere near the action. Turn 4 for my opponent. So, Lady Ilona, let's just show you where she was. My opponent's Lady Ilona, you can see in the bottom right of the screen there, she's just standing out in the open. My zombie unit there is actually not on the hill. It may look like they are because they're propped up by the hill, but most of the unit is not on the hill. So Lady Ilona can actually see the Revenant King on horse through them. So that's why she's able to charge him here. So that could be painful. And the Standard Bearer, I think it might Bane Chant the catapult, something like that may have happened there. And the catapult kills Lycanis. So wow, Lycanis is dead, and the catapult has done a great job so far. Skeleton Horde into the Zombie Legion, so that's going to get flanked as well now. And I think these kind of not very sustained attacks from the Skeleton Hordes are not what you need to take out Zombie Legions. I probably wouldn't even recommend making an attack here at all. I would just stay back and make sure you're not getting flanked by these ridiculous number of attacks from these units. So maybe a mistake there. Revenant King is wavered, which is okay. Still providing some inspiring. And you can see the Soul Reaver infantry, one of the units has actually poked its toe into the woods, which could be fatal because my cavalry can see them, and I won't be hindered because I've got the Potion of the Caterpillar. So I'm probably going to make that charge while I've got the opportunity to attack them, because why not? There's not much really to threaten their flank without some serious surging shenanigans going on, and even then it would likely be skeletons who despite getting lots of attacks, would be going up against defense 6 while hindered. So I wouldn't be too concerned about them. The other Soul Reavers are not really doing anything useful. A bit of a lesson here, if you have really hard-hitting units like this that aren't worth that much to the scenario because they're only regiments, they're not worth as much as a horde, or they're worth the same as a skeleton regiment, so the skeleton regiment shouldn't really be the ones that are closer to being in the thick of it. You want to get these hard-hitting units in there actually doing damage, I think. It's not the easiest though, because I did have the speed advantage in this game, but I don't think my opponent really needed to fear Lycanis and could have just steamed forward into his charge range quite happily. And over there, you can see that my several units are ready to steam in and join this fight in the centre, and it's going to be a bit of mopping up on that skeleton horde probably in a minute. Turn 4 for me, so just spreading out. The Soul Reavers are just moving towards... They're trying to move towards the junction of all 4 of those table sections, so that then they can decide where they're needed in the last turn. So if they need to just dart somewhere to prevent the enemy holding a section, or to... especially if it's my central area, because it's possible the enemy could end up holding that. So I've got a regiment there ready to jump in, and if they don't need to do that, they can just claim one of the others. And the Wraiths make it into combat along with some zombies into that skeleton horde there, and put lots of damage on them, but don't kill them yet. And the Revenant King couldn't make it into combat with anyone, so he's just chilling out behind them for now. He's ready to position himself to steal a table section or to charge something in a minute. And Soul Reaver Cavalry charge through the woods into the Soul Reaver infantry, but don't do enough damage to kill them. So disappointing there. But it's still looking very healthy for me at this stage. I've got lots of scoring units left, and my opponent has 4, 2 of which are heavily damaged and definitely shouldn't survive the game at this rate. And over here you can see what I was saying, just positioning those Soul Reavers so they can move between the table sections at the end, because I am going to be going last. Turn 5. So, Lady Alona going back into the Revenant King again. It's tempting to just keep doing this to take out the inspiring character, but with the scenario, you've got to get rid of the unit strength. So using Alona's decent number of attacks to help out one of the units to fight, for example, the Skeleton Horde charging into some zombies, they're not going to do enough to kill them, but throwing Alona in there as well, just start racking up the damage on these units, I think could have been a wise move, because that Revenant King on horse, all he's doing is inspiring them. He's not going to be scoring, and the zombies are definitely going to live without Ilona's assistance. It's tempting to think, well, she's an individual, she's not going to help out that much, but she could end up doing like 6 or 7 damage with a half-decent roll. And over here, the skeletons are pushing in. The Soul Reaver infantry that aren't already in the thick of it are finally getting in there, even though the game's almost over. So they're regretting their positioning, I think. And the catapult just turns this time because there's no useful targets. So just aim at where there might be a juicy target next turn. Skeletons have gone into the zombies. And they actually do a decent bit of damage there. Look at that. But they do not manage to kill them. But it just makes you think, if Alona had chipped in there, and if she'd ended up doing, let's say, 6 damage on that unit, they would have been pretty damn close to death at this point, if they didn't just go immediately. And I don't think killing off the Inspiring would have made any difference here either, because the Revenant King on Worm is up there, perfectly healthy. So I think Alona helping out in that combat would have been a shrewd move there, that could have killed them. But Alona does take out the Revenant King down here. And the Soul Reaver Cavalry get wavered from the countercharge from the elite Soul Reaver infantry there, with 8 damage dished out, so that's painful. And there's how it's looking, so that Skeleton Horde definitely going to die. The Soul Reaver infantry may be dying soon. I've got units that can charge them at the moment. Not the Soul Reaver Cavalry, and they are kind of getting in the way, so I may not be able to kill them this turn. But we'll see what I've got in mind here. The Skeletons are potentially a threat to my central control area, but they're only a regiment, and I've got quite a bit of unit strength still alive. Turn 5 for me. So, This unit of Soul Reaver infantry are still just working their way to make sure they're in a good spot to dive into a different table section. Zombies and wraiths take out the skeletons, and this zombie unit, I think they move out of the way backwards to allow all the units to fit in and do what they want to do. Because this unit's heavily damaged, so they just want to get out of the way. And there's the spot that was vacated. You can see the zombie legion there turned round after combat to face my central area, because there is a skeleton regiment heading back there. And the wraiths are poised to be a threat for next time. And the Revenant King on Worm, did it kill somebody there? Was there anything there? Let me just check. It doesn't look like it. Looks like it just jumped over there and is being a bit of a nuisance and a threat. And it's also in a good spot now to charge the catapult next turn, which is what I would like to do, because then, just in case there's a turn 7, it'll prevent it shooting, and also I'll be able to claim that table section as well. And the good thing about that as well, if there is the possibility that somebody could charge my Revenant King on Worm, Lady Ilona is hanging out down there. If she charges him, though, she won't be in his front, so she wouldn't be able to stop him potentially going forwards to charge the catapult regardless, because he is still very fast even if he gets grounded. And my Lady Ilona is chilling next to the werewolves, giving them a bit of inspiring, because they're very important now. They're holding the enemy central control area, and they are wounded. And the enemy Ilona does have a lightning bolt possibility to attack them with. So there's how it's looking. Very, very healthy still for me. Only 3 enemy units left that can score. Enemy turn 6 coming up. So skeletons are not joining in this combat. It's just double Soul Reaver infantry into my Soul Reaver cavalry. That's going to eat them alive, despite the hindrance to the charges. And the skeletons are just chilling out down there. Ilona does charge into the Revenant King on Worm. And the Soul Reaver cavalry are dead as expected. And you can see the Revenant King on Worm took 6 damage, or he's up to 6 damage now after the attack from Lady Ilona, but nothing is positioned in front of him, so he is going to be able to charge the catapult now. And it's still looking good for me. I've got charge options coming up, because the Soul Reaver infantry unit there that's on 6 damage, the Wraiths can certainly charge them, and I think Lady Ilona might be in range to do so as well. Turn 6, and the werewolves are just chilling, because they're already in a good spot to score. Lady Ilona and the Wraiths do charge into the Soul Reavers, the Soul Reaver infantry unit that were wounded, and manage to kill them off, and the Wraiths turn to face the Soul Reaver infantry that are still alive. My enemy are now down to 2 scoring units, and all my other units are just positioning themselves to be in a juicy spot to score. And looking very good. It's looking virtually impossible to not win at this stage, but there is actually something that my opponent can do, because there is a turn 7. Had it ended there, you can't, I don't think you can see in this picture, but the Revenant King did just run away and kill the catapult. So he's chilling in the top left. I don't know if I actually took a picture of that this turn. He's up there. In the middle, I've got my opponent's central area, which is worth 2, and I've also got my own central area, which is worth 1. And I think I've got another one over on the right as well with my Soul Reaver infantry there. Perhaps. So if it ended now, it would certainly be a win to me. But we do get a turn 7. And I'll just show you, because I'll give you a bit of an overview here. So my werewolves, they are damaged. The only way that my opponent in turn 7 can avoid losing this game would be to kill my werewolves, because they're a very important scoring unit there. And the only way to reach them would be for Lady Ilona, I think, to use a lightning bolt on them, because they have actually moved backwards to get out of her charge range, I think, because she was the biggest threat to them. So she could use lightning bolt on them and get very, very lucky and kill them, which would deprive me of 2 points. Then my opponent would also have to kill potentially a zombie legion. I think the unit of skeletons or the standard bearer might have some ranged attack. Maybe the skeletons. I'm not 100% sure. There's something there that has a breath attack, but I can't remember what it is because it wasn't too useful up until now. But there is the option to try and get rid of the heavily wounded zombie legion there. And then if the Soul Reavers kill the Wraiths, that would put me down to 2 scoring units as well. Actually 3, because I've got the Revenant King in the top of the screen as well on the left. So I think it is theoretically possible for my opponent to get a draw out of this, but it would require astronomical odds being met with some of the dice rolls. So, Soul Reavers into the Wraiths, Skeletons into the Zombie Legion, and 7 damage done there. Not going to be enough, I'm afraid. Zombie Legion's going to be fine. The Werewolves are not concerned about Ilona's Lightning Bolt at all. And yeah, so it's going to be a win for me now. In my turn 7, what do I do though? Well, I've got him standing in there still. And I don't manage to kill any of the units with my counter charges. I think I just took the pictures before we'd even marked any damage on them. So we could just speed through the end since I'd already won. And that's going to be that. So victory points for me. I've got 1 for the top left. I've got 2 for the centre. That's 3 so far. I've also got some of these over on the right because I think I've got units positioned kind of on the borderline. And I believe I have my own central section which is worth 1 as well. And I think I may have abandoned the territory on the right in favour of guarding my centre and making sure I had enough in there. I'm not 100% sure, but either way, it's probably about a 4 or 5-0 victory point win for me there. And overall, very, very good result for at least half of the Undead on the table. Now, the list, I was a little bit concerned that I was lacking in numbers of units, but it is a very, very elite army. And the units do hit extremely hard. 3 really powerful Soul Reaver units that just delete things with relative ease. Ilona, who is just a combat monster as well, with her 8 attacks, many of which are going to cause wounds. The Werewolves, definitely not to be sniffed at either, especially with the Brew of Strength. They're very fast and expensive. They hit hard. The Zombie Legions provide a nice bit of cushion with their Nerve Dash 28. It's going to take quite a bit to chew through them. The Revenant King, the one on the horse, fills a decent role. The one on the Undead Worm as well is a threat without being too hugely expensive compared to some of the other flyers. Maybe doesn't hit as hard as some of the other flyers, he only hits on 4s. Lycanis didn't get to do much in this game, but I think his presence was enough to cause maybe a bit of undue concern for the opposing heavy-hitting units just because they were slower than Lycanis, so they were a bit hesitant to get to within range. Overall though, I think I just did a good job getting my hard-hitting units into combat and killing things. Going for that one big strike where I just wiped multiple units in one go. I think after that it was going to be an uphill task for my opponent after losing those expensive units in that one big fell swoop there. And then I was able to come in and start wiping out other units and just claiming table sections. It's not the most balanced list that I've got here though, because there could be scenarios where I wouldn't want to leave any of these units on objectives. Every single unit in the army that can hold an objective is fairly expensive. Lycanis, I think, is the cheapest potentially scoring unit in here, and even he's 145 points. Everything else is around about 200 or more. Anything else that can score. So yeah, I'm not sure how it would do in a tournament with lots of different scenarios, but I wanted to try it out. I wanted to try out Ilona's formation. I think it went quite well. And very tasty indeed. Very nice game. And 2 lists on paper that had some similarities, but the extra speed that I had was definitely a factor. And the fact that I got my units that I wanted in combat into combat. Right, time to wrap this one up. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description. Don't forget to keep your eyes peeled because there'll be one more battle report coming from this gaming session. This is the same session as the previous battle report, so one more, and the final one is going to be against this undead opponent again, but I'll be using my goblins in that game, so you can look forward to seeing that game coming up fairly soon. And don't forget to join my Facebook group and all that good stuff, and send me loads of just endless cash non-stop. That's what all the cool kids do. And with that, all that remains to be said is good night out there, whatever you are.